Welcome back to Ditch the Diet Club. This week is lesson 5. We're going to talk about blood sugar stabilization and what that means. So different foods have different effects on our blood sugar. We've talked a little bit about how the amount of food that we eat and sometimes the calories that we eat will affect our fullness, but blood sugar is another important thing to consider. So blood sugar, what is blood sugar? It's also known as blood glucose. It's really the amount of free-floating sugar that we have in our bloodstream at any point in time. Ideally, this is highest after a meal and lowest between meals. If you know someone with diabetes or have diabetes yourself, you understand that diabetes is the impaired control of blood sugar. Controlling our blood sugar is very important. It affects our mood, our cravings, and also our overall health. If our blood sugar is constantly high or constantly low, we will see health outcomes directly affected by that. So when we think about nutrients, there are two types, macronutrients and micronutrients. Micronutrients are present in smaller amounts in foods, which is why they're called micro. These are things like vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. Macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are present in foods in larger amounts, and that's where we see an effect on your blood sugar. So I mentioned that our blood sugar should be kept in an optimal range. We never want it to get too low or too high. Well, here I have shown the optimal range for blood sugar. It's between 80 and 140 milligrams per deciliter, but you don't need to know that. So carbohydrates have the strongest effect on blood sugar. I'm going to use a red marker to show you how eating a carbohydrate food would affect blood sugar. So carbohydrate foods start with a rapid spike. We often peak at the top of that optimal range and come down as fast as we went up. The problem with this is that we can then have a rebound low blood sugar, which makes us crave this carbohydrate all over again. This would be foods like cookies, cakes, pastas, potatoes. White carbohydrates tend to have the strongest effect on this blood sugar. The second macronutrient is protein. Now, protein doesn't have quite as strong of an effect on your blood sugar as carbohydrates, but we still get a slight rise. The nice thing about protein is that the fall is a little bit slower. We're less likely to get that rebound effect as we did with the carbohydrate. Finally, the third macronutrient, fats. Fats have the lowest effect on our blood sugar. The rise happens very slowly, and so does the fall. If you've ever had a really high fat meal, you know what this feels like. You're often full for a very long time. So we can see that the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats all have very different effects on the blood sugar. Ideally, a meal will contain all three of these macronutrients because the fat and the protein help balance out that sharp rise from the carbohydrates. So when you have a balanced meal or snack, the curve should look a little bit like this. This way, we never spike too high or too low and end up overly full or overly hungry, which we know sets us up for failure. Have you ever eaten a piece of fruit just by itself with nothing else? That would be considered a carbohydrate snack. It probably doesn't keep you full for very long, and you might end up getting hungry quite soon. By pairing that fruit with some protein or fat, you can actually help extend the length of this curve, keeping you fuller longer. So instead of having just that apple, maybe add some cheese or some peanut butter, and you'll be sustained a lot longer, avoiding that crash in blood sugar. Now, don't let this scare you. This shouldn't scare you away from carbohydrates. Let's say we have just a meal with proteins and fats. Maybe it's a green salad with some chicken and some olive oil-based dressing. If we don't add a source of carbohydrates there, maybe it's a little bit of whole wheat pita or some chickpeas on the salad. If we don't have that, we won't get that immediate rise in blood sugar from the carbohydrate. And that immediate rise in blood sugar is what makes us feel good right after a meal. So don't skimp on the carbohydrates, just make sure you balance them with a protein source and a fat source. So hopefully today's lesson gave you an idea of how to build a balanced meal and snack using all 3 macronutrients. In next week, we will be talking about honoring your cravings. That's lesson number 6 on Ditch the Diet Club, and I will see you then.